Okay, let me make sure this recording is working. All right. So welcome to your first YouTube class for the week. Today we're going to talk about how to write rhetorical analysis introduction paragraphs. So one of the reasons that we learn how to write body paragraphs before intro paragraphs is that if you remember, your whole objective of this paper is to argue if the author was effective or ineffective in persuading his or her audience. Now, until you've written some paragraphs of analysis and you've spent time analyzing the text that you're looking at, it's hard to write an intro paragraph when you don't know if you're going to say if overall the paper was effective or ineffective for the audience. Now remember, you can, in the body of your paper, say that parts of the text you're analyzing were effective, parts were ineffective, and still say overall the paper was effective or overall it was ineffective. So you don't have to write completely that everything went well and that the rhetorical choices were perfect. You don't have to say that they were all terrible. You can have a mix of both, but in your intro paragraph, you're going to argue if overall the paper was effective or ineffective in persuading the audience. So, I have a student example here today. The best way to learn how to write something is to look at a good example. This is the title of this student's paper, The Guilt Trip, Irony and Illusion in Refuting the False Doctrine of Globalization. Now, Refuting the False Doctrine of Globalization is the title of the text that this student analyzed. And in their title, they indicate that they are going to talk about irony and illusion used. You don't have to do this specifically. You don't have to name in your title or in your intro paragraph the specific rhetorical tools you're going to be analyzing, but it's an option here for you. So this is the full paragraph put together. I'm not going to read through this here. You can pause the video and read through it yourself, but I'm going to break it down in the next few slides. So step one is a hook. Just like any other paper, you want to draw your reader in with the first sentence or two. You want to use vivid language and imagery. You want to appeal to pathos, so have some kind of emotional appeal. This is often done by using specific language that appeals to the senses, and it should be brief, 1 to 2 sentences. This is one of the only points in your paper where you're going to talk about the actual subject matter of your essay. The rest of your paper should be analysis and talking only about the rhetorical choices the author made. So, for example, most people wouldn't think that globalization and religion go hand in hand. According to Cynthia Molobita, they do. So, this student has started with an interesting statement that makes the reader want to know more. Most people wouldn't think about globalization and religion going hand in hand. Notice this isn't an overly dramatic hook. These papers are not going to be dramatic by any means. They are pretty academic, straightforward, so that your hook should be the same. Step 2, you want to just give some basic background info on your paper. The rest of your paper, you can just write with the assumption that I have read the same text that you have read. Even if I haven't, you can write with that assumption. So this is the only place you really need to give some background info, and that's just to help your reader, who is me in this case, feel oriented and understand what piece you are analyzing. So basic background info, the author, the title, and then tell us what's the author's intended argument and the author's intended audience. So for example, the student says, Molobita. Now notice, after naming the author's full name, every other time she references her author that she's analyzing, she just uses the last name, which is a good, that's correct MLA. Molobita is an associate professor of environmental studies, theology, and religious studies at Seattle University. She wrote the article Refuting the False Doctrine of Globalization For a Christian magazine called The Other Side: Strength for the Journey. Looking at the phrase false doctrine in the title of the article gives the reader a glimpse of the author's strong feelings of disgust for globalization, while simultaneously revealing the religious diction the author will use for her religious audience. So, we understand who the author is, the title of the article she's analyzing, and the basic argument and audience of the author of the text that we're analyzing. Now, here's a trick for step 2. It's really easy in rhetorical analysis to fall into what we call author praise. You're trying to talk about something an author did well, or that saying that they were persuasive, and it usually, it can come out as overly praising the author. Just remember, you're an observer here. There's no need to overly praise the author perfectly portrayed something, or no one can doubt that everyone would be persuaded by this. It's dramatic and over the top to say phrases like that. Instead, just say the author effectively persuaded his or her audience. Speak intelligently and objectively. It's especially easy to fall into author praise in the introduction. Step 3. Now this intro paragraph only has 3 steps. It's going to be a shorter paragraph than your opinion editorial. You just need a clear thesis statement. You can use "I would argue that" because you are expressing an opinion in this paper, but remember, your opinion is only about the effectiveness of the author. You want to use simple language and just be clear about the overall effectiveness or ineffectiveness of the piece of rhetoric you are analyzing. Make sure you mention the audience. Here's what our student example says. It says, in refuting the false doctrine of globalization, Molo Bida effectively persuades wealthy Christians to fight against the widely accepted evil method of globalization using angry diction, biblical allusions, and irony. So we see her argument is clear. The author effectively persuades her audience of wealthy Christians of her argument, which in this case is that globalization is evil, is the argument this author is trying to make. You'll notice that this student names 3 rhetorical tools she's going to analyze. You don't have to do that, but it's an option for you. You're probably going to end up analyzing more than 3 tools, and if that's the case, I would not recommend doing this. Now here I have a poor student example. This student gives good background on their paper that they're analyzing. But if you pause this video and read through this poor student example, you'll notice the thing that this student is missing is any kind of thesis about whether or not their author, Malcolm Gladwell, was effective in persuading his audience. It's great to talk about the paper you're analyzing and gives background, but if you don't have that strong, clear thesis statement, the whole paper will be confusing. So, for the assignment for today, I want you to use this PowerPoint and this video to write your own intro paragraph. Follow the steps as closely as possible if you are still concerned about how to write it. As always, I give you kind of a template for writing these. If you feel like you want to branch out and you feel like it would be a smart rhetorical choice, or you feel comfortable adding more, or taking a different approach, that's great, but there needs to be this basic content. You need a hook, we need some background on your article, and we need a clear thesis statement. So you'll go ahead and write that in the submission form for this assignment, and when you submit it, you will receive your attendance points for today. As always, if you have any questions, you are more than welcome to send me an email.